Well, welcome everyone. My name is Frederick Winsness, and I'm with NetHope, and I want to welcome everyone to yet another NetHope Solutions Center webinar, another one in our series for the No Loss Generation Tech Task Force webinar series. Today we're pleased to be joined by International Medical Corps and Endless OS to discuss using technology to expand educational opportunities for Syrian refugees in Jordan. And before we get underway, let me just quickly go over our regular housekeeping rules. I would ask everyone to stay muted to minimize background noise. We do, however, want to make this as interactive as possible, so we want to answer your questions. Please open the chat window in WebEx and line up your questions there for a Q&A session towards the end of the hour. There'll probably be some commentary there that you may want to follow along with as well. So yeah, we strongly encourage you to open the chat window to follow along there as well. We're also going to ask you to fill out a quick webinar satisfaction poll towards the end of the session today, and I will be posting a link to that in the chat window as well, like 3 to 5 minutes before we end the session. And we are recording this session, so and we will be sending out an email pointing to the webinar posting page on the NetHope Solutions Center with the recording and the collateral and a potential Q&A document if you don't get to answer all of your questions today. So without any further ado, I will introduce Leila Toplik. She is with the No Loss Generation Tech Task Force. She's driving that effort from NetHope perspective, and she'll introduce the speakers and talk a little bit about the NLG Tech Task Force. So Leila?
Thank you, Frederick. So welcome on behalf of the NLG Tech Task Force, and thank you for joining us this morning or this afternoon. So we tend to show this task force overview slide every time we convene, as there are new members joining us on a regular basis. Just briefly, the main focus of the Tech Task Force is to connect experts in humanitarian response with the private sector expertise and resources to address the needs of displaced children and youth. And we do that through information exchanges such as this webinar series and also project-based collaborations. And since the NLG initiative, NetHope and Microsoft came together to launch the task force 9 months ago, the task force community has grown to over 50 organizations, including global and local NGOs and UN agencies, private sector companies, academic institutions, and also social entrepreneurs. And then speaking of participation in the task force, if you can click to the next slide, Frederick. Next, great, thank you. So if you haven't already done so, sign up for the task force so you can receive future communications and invitations. Attend these task force webinars. One more is coming up before the end of the year. We will be talking about game-based learning with War Child and UNICEF. You can also review recordings of the past task force webinars and other available resources and potential partnerships. And do share these resources with your colleagues around the world. Everything that we do with the task force is accessible and available to anyone working with displaced children and youth around the world. As we get ready for 2018, I'd love to hear from you, your recommendations for future task force webinars, where you need most help, and also what programs you think we should be featuring on the webinars. And then if you have any technology-related questions, and some of you have had them in the past, you're welcome to email me. My email is posted on this slide. So on the next slide, what I'd love to just tell you more about is one of the upcoming convenings that we're hosting in Amman. So speaking of the information exchanges and collaborations, it's my pleasure to invite you, task force members, to join us at the NLG Tech Summit in Amman on February 21st and 22nd. This event will be highlighting some of the key challenges faced by young people displaced by conflicts in Syria and Iraq, as well as young people living in the communities hosting them. These challenges specifically include education, employment, participation, and also protection. So our goal at the summit is to have the humanitarian response experts and private sector companies, startup community, academic institutions, donors, investors, and also displaced youth working together to identify specific solutions to the 4 challenges that I just shared. There are a number of ways you can participate, and the time is kind of running out, so the clock is ticking. You can participate as an attendee. Do register. Link will be available in the slides, and we'll post them in the chat window. So register prior to January 15th. We're reviewing all of the applications. So the steering committee includes World Vision, NRC, Mercy Corps, UNICEF, and NetHope. You can participate as an exhibitor, as a speaker, both as a keynote speaker on the main stage or a participant in a panel, as well as hosting sessions, breakout sessions at the event. You can participate as a sponsor. Would love to have new additional sponsors join us. Currently, the event is sponsored by World Vision and NetHope, and then we also plan to offer mentoring opportunities to displaced youth at the summit, so you can sign up to be a mentor. If there are any questions about the summit, please send me an email, and happy to follow up. Now coming back to the webinar, the focus of this webinar, if you click to the next slide, excellent. So today's webinar is featuring tech-enabled partnership between the International Medical Corps and Endless OS that is serving refugee and also host community children and youth in Jordan. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's featured speakers. Rebecca Milner, who's the Vice President of Institutional Advancement at the IMC, and Michael Hill, who's the Head of Business Development for Africa and the Middle East at Endless. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you, Leila. I appreciate this opportunity to share our experience with our colleagues. Thanks, everyone, for attending this morning. I just wanted to start with a brief overview of International Medical Corps. Many of you might be familiar with our work, but International Medical Corps is a global first responder to war, disaster, and disease. We've been around since 1984. Since that time, we've delivered about $2.7 billion in program services and training in more than 75 countries. Currently, we are in about 30 countries. We have 7,000 staff members around the world, and we are deeply involved in responding to the Syria crisis. To kind of kick off this discussion, I wanted to share a video with you, which was made by Syrian refugees in Zatri camp in one of our community centers. And I think it just kind of sets the tone for our discussion today and really talks about the need. So Frederick, if you'd play that video. So that video was made in 2014, and our youth empowerment programs and our community centers have expanded since then. But I'll just, Frederick, if you would advance the next slide, just to let you know that International Medical Corps has been deeply involved in responding to the crisis since the beginning. We are inside Syria, are operational in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and then in 2015 and 16 with the influx of refugees into Greece and Europe, we responded there as well. If you go to the next slide. Today we're talking about Jordan, and International Medical Corps provides primary and secondary health care, mental health support, child protection services, and gender-based violence response and prevention programs. And we have 11 different community centers that we run under what's called the Makani Center umbrella. If you would advance to the next slide, Frederick. So the Makani Centers are safe spaces in refugee camps and in host communities where children and parents and people affected by the crisis can come and access services. And we provide these services as well as informal learning opportunities and services that people can begin to access and build their support network, of course, because everyone knows that, Jordan is hosting 660,000 registered refugees, and reports, are up to more than 1 million refugees are settling in Jordan. So, some of those people are inside refugee camps, but the vast majority of those refugees are outside refugee camps in host communities. And so we've set up these kind of community centers, safe spaces where children and parents can come and sort of build out their network of support and access informal learning opportunities. I think most of you probably know that there are about 230,000 Syrian refugees who are school-aged, but not that are school-aged in Jordan, half of whom are not currently attending school. So the target population for these Makani centers is to reach children who are not currently enrolled in school. And so we use this opportunity to provide them with informal learning opportunities. So the children that are sort of most at risk, they're at risk for child labor, increased domestic violence, corporal punishment in schools and homes, certainly sexual violence against girls and women, worried, of course, concerned about early marriage, and violent extremism, sort of. And so these services that we offer, sort of help address, our part of it is helping address those issues and really offering services to people who are most at risk. So the Makani Centers provide opportunities for recreation, play, and, as I said, informal education. So these, we have 5 centers in Zatri camp, 2 in Azraq camp, and we have service in the host communities in Mafraq, Zarqa, and another community, Irbid, in outside of Amman, Jordan. So these centers offer a variety of different opportunities for children to access different services, but it includes they participate in a program that lasts 4 months. The children come, they're in a network, and they access different opportunities to play, engage in English language courses, media, theater, sports, handicrafts, etc. And then we also have established these computer centers with Endless. And so to date, we have distributed 112 computers to the different centers, and more than 650 students have accessed those computer learning opportunities. And so I was going to turn it over to Mike so he can explain what the Endless opportunity, or the Endless OS system offers, and then we can talk about how we integrate it into our programming.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. It's been wonderful partnering with International Medical Corps. A little bit about Endless. We are a technology company headquartered in San Francisco, and we build computers. Specifically, our product is an operating system, but essentially we are designing a computer for emerging markets, for users exactly like the refugees that International Medical Corps is working with. And so it's a wonderful partnership, and we actually rely on organizations like International Medical Corps to reach our target user. And so, like I said, I wanted to share a little bit more about Endless, but what we're selling, right, is a computer because the problem that exists in terms of access to computers is really that they're quite expensive, and there's also very little internet access. So next slide, if you could. Perfect. So to address the first point I mentioned, right, cost is obviously prohibitive. The wealthiest 2 billion people in the world, they have computers, and they can afford it, which is why, but the next 3 billion and below that simply don't. And it's a fairly straightforward issue in that, even the lowest cost computers also basically don't work very well. So even if you can afford a $150, $200 computer, they may not last very long, or the performance isn't that great. And so that actually is more of a software challenge, where we've built an operating system to actually solve that. The next slide, please. But the bigger barrier outside of cost, as I mentioned, is really internet access. Because if you're using a normal computer, Windows computer has Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but if you don't have internet, there's really not that much else you can do with it. So I want to show, I think, a quick video, if you can go to the next slide, that kind of explains a little bit more about Endless OS and how we're solving those two issues of cost and connectivity. And then I'll definitely be able to talk a little bit more about what we've done in the Makani Centers to help International Medical Corps. But you want to go ahead and play that video, yeah. All right, perfect. So if you could go to the next slide, it gives you a little bit of an overview, right? So the core features of Endless made it a great partner for Makani, where they're working where International Medical Corps is. Internet connectivity is obviously limited, so we are basically able to provide the encyclopedia, knowledge applications as a full educational suite of K through 12 math, science content that can take kids through pretty much an entire education, at their fingertips, which is pretty incredible. So just go through some of the examples that mentioned in the video. Next slide. So, I mentioned education is obviously a cornerstone of our focus. So, the knowledge applications and things around learning typing and learning programming, educational games for both young and older students, create so many opportunities to actually develop and help kids learn, even in the most remote areas. The languages that we cover are basically, there's about 15 that include all of the offline content. So there's 3 or 4 in Southeast Asia: Arabic, French, Spanish, Portuguese, English. We'll be coming out with Swahili in the next few months. And there's also Chinese and a few others. So it's definitely something we are working on as we expand to new regions to try to cover new languages. Next slide. Obviously, more than just education, we want to be a tool for SMBs and also students that are preparing for their, sorry, can you go back a couple slides? 2 more slides back, if you could. There we go, apps for working. Oh, one more, sorry. Apps for working, there we go. So graphic design, audio, video editing, text calculating, normal tools. And obviously, if you do have internet, you can use all the normal web browsers that you're used to. But the idea here is, university students or even businesses working in remote regions, we have options to kind of accomplish all of your daily business goals. Our entire company, that video, everything that we do was designed and built using software on Endless. So we definitely try to use our own product and demonstrate what's possible. But again, there's a focus on everything available offline. Next slide. Obviously, entertainment is a major portion of this too, and trying to make education entertaining is probably one of the biggest things that helps students progress. And so there's probably 60 or 70 games that again are available completely offline. Some are matching colors for very young children. Some are more strategic games that actually get older students to think. Some are educational and some are just entertaining. But other things like listening to music, editing photos, drawing apps as well. Next slide. And so one of the big things that we do with organizations like IMC and governments when we deploy larger units is we can actually provide additional services on top of the computers that are being deployed in the form of metrics, right? This is basically, if you're going to invest in computers, everything is around measuring the impact. So next slide. This is about understanding how the computers are being used. Hopefully everyone else can still see the slides because I think they may have disappeared from me.
I'll bring it right back to you.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, next slide. So essentially, this is about understanding what's happening with the computers that you're deploying, which applications are being opened, how much time they're spending on each one, and is a major part of the value that we can deliver in deploying computers in these areas. Next slide. The other part of kind of the additional services that we can provide on larger deployments is basically customizing Endless OS. So this is about, if you have a specific mission or goal in mind, we can do things to cater the experience to what your goals are. So next slide. So for example, something we did with an International Medical Corps is they are actually dual booting Endless with Windows. which obviously does provide access specifically to Microsoft Office applications, which are a big part of what people look for. Although we do have an open Office suite with a word processor and spreadsheet as well. So the applications, the customization that we can provide, this is about choosing what's available offline. We can feature different aspects of the operating system and the content that's on there. We can customize the background image, all sorts of things to create kind of a specific experience. Next slide. The second, then on top of the OS itself, specific content, right? So if your nonprofit has a mission around hygiene, right, or access to good food or water, your focus might be on nutrition, we can provide custom applications, right? So if you have content or educational material that you are trying to communicate across, this is a great way to actually communicate that in an offline area. And it can actually be sent over very small bandwidths, the way that we build these applications. So essentially, we are kind of a platform for you to deliver educational content that's specific to your organization through kind of a custom application. We've done this in many different languages and for many different organizations. It's a big part of our kind of value add service on top of the core computer. Next slide. The last thing I'll mention too is if you already have computers, if you've supported schools in the past that have kind of reached the end of their life, their Windows license is expired, or are just a little too slow to run Windows, because of the OS is built for low-cost hardware, we can basically bring them back to life. And obviously that cost is very small compared to buying a new computer. So this is a big part of our business, working with governments and NGOs and schools directly. Next slide. So I just wanted to introduce you real quick, and I think this is the last portion here, to the hardware that we actually sell, right? Because it is primarily focused on a range of low-cost hardware, and that's essentially what we've been optimized for. So this is, we're the only operating system that's been built for that purpose. Next slide. So a few examples here, and I think this is probably more follow-up conversations if anyone has any questions here, but it gives you kind of a rough range. The laptop between 140 and 160. The Enterprise is kind of a mini PC that can be tacked on to the back of a television. It's pretty much 5 inches by 5 inches, a very small form. Then you have kind of the more design, aesthetically looking Endless One and Mission One. So the International Medical Corps deployed the Mission One computer in their Makani centers, which has been working very well, and we look forward to expanding the program with them. I believe Rebecca's going to talk a little bit more about that. But obviously, the peripherals around monitors and keyboards are all focused on a very low price point. So this just gives you kind of a how to actually deploy. What the next step is there's hardware that we can provide. Next slide. And this just gives you an idea of our company right now. We're in 6 offices. I head up our Africa region, which, as you can see, looks a little bit gray there because we are just getting started. But obviously, most of our focus has been on Southeast Asia. We need to color in a few more countries there because we opened a Jakarta office just in the last few months. But expansion is happening all over the place, and we're very excited to obviously expand in the Middle East and work with some of the refugee crisis regions as well, because of that is kind of our target purpose is to reach users like that. So excited to expand there as well. I think that's the next slide is a bit of a call to action. It's just ways to learn more. You can go to our website. Our solutions page is how we partner deployments like this, and then obviously my contact information is there. So thank you, and it was a pleasure to be here. I guess I'm turning it over to Rebecca again.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the computers have been really well received in the centers. And as some of our colleagues have pointed out, the Makani Centers are run by International Medical Corps in partnership with UNICEF. So UNICEF is our funding partner, and we operate, under their umbrella. So do want to acknowledge the importance of our partnership with UNICEF. I mean, you know, the computers were installed in August, so we've just been sort of monitoring them. They've sort of had a first quarter evaluation, and as I mentioned, I mean, we had more than 650 children access the computers. Interestingly, it's been about 50% boys, 50% girls, and their sort of favorites, of course, are learning Microsoft Office, the suite, which, as Mike said, we were able to install it and run both, so that those kind of popular software, people can access those. People love learning how to use email and accessing sort of some of the social media when they can have internet connections. That's easier in the host communities than in the refugee community. But also the younger children, you know, are accessing the encyclopedias, using it to kind of explore and talk together about certain subjects that they're very interested in. The photo and video editing is very popular, and then of course all of the games, and in particular the cooking app has been super popular. But you know, one of the other questions that I saw in the chat space was, you know, can adults access these computers? And they do. After the children's activities are done, we do have adults coming in to use the computers in the evening, and of course they use them for, you know, resume building, working on polishing their skills, Microsoft applications, as you know, as well as some of the design and how to, you know, run your own business, etc. So, I mean, I do think that that has been an added benefit. And, you know, we run the centers primarily, we have some staff that are there, but it's primarily volunteers from the Syrian refugee community that want to get involved and help their own community. And so we have a rotating cast of volunteers that help support and offer help and assistance to both the children and adults that are working with the computers. So those are just some of the early results, and we are, you know, continuing to monitor it and happy to contribute. I mean, we've talked about this partnership with Endless and have then made additional connections with International Rescue Committee and some of the other NGOs that are beginning to use Endless. And so we're trying to create kind of a learning community and how we can leverage this incredible resource that Endless has developed. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thanks so much, and thank you, Mike, too, for an excellent overview. And also thanks for clarifying the kind of the connection to UNICEF. I've included a link to the PDF that provides some more context for Makani being a UNICEF developed initiative and IMC driving the work in Jordan. So just briefly, like a higher level question before we dive into the specific questions in the chat window. One is, what does it take to set up a Makani Center, and are you planning any new centers in 2018, whether it's in Jordan or any other countries? And then if you could kind of double click on what you just shared about the partnership and with Endless and share some of the lessons learned from implementing Endless computers in Makani centers.
Sure. As I mentioned, I mean, our partnership with UNICEF is instrumental into our ability to operate these Makani centers, and so we kind of look at them in a year ahead. We talk to UNICEF, and UNICEF is working with other partners as well. These are just the ones that International Medical Corps runs. So really that is led by UNICEF. I mean, I guess some of the sort of interesting lessons learned is really the need for kind of training and deep connections with the sort of local staff and the volunteers that are setting up and operating the computers. So Mike's team and our team may have a great relationship at headquarters, and we're developing the plans for, you know, getting the computers into the country and into the centers. But I think we learned that there needs to be additional training, more attention and time paid to making sure that our staff and our volunteers are oriented to what the Endless OS offers. So, you know, we had an instance where some of the Endless OS was overwritten by the sort of Microsoft, and Endless helped us kind of be able to run both of them at the same time. But I just think that the sort of education and training of our staff members and volunteers is a key lesson learned, that we have to do more of that, and really for them to understand the incredible opportunity that Endless OS offers, and the fact that there's so much that they can access, you know, even without having a connection to the internet. And I think the other kind of thing that we would, you know, say that we have to kind of keep in mind is that I think that there is so much that the Endless OS offers that I think we should give our staff and volunteers time to explore it themselves, so that they're, you know, really familiar with it. I think it's a new product, and like I said, there's just so much available that I just don't think we've really scratched the surface of how to fully integrate it into our educational opportunities. It's kind of been a little more, it's been self-directed, and I think that there's more that we could pull out of it, so that adults, for example, could access that sort of how to start up a business kind of, you know, application and get information from that. I think that there's many ways that we can deepen and expand the use of all of the different applications that Endless offers, and I'd say that's the big lesson learned.
It really sounds like a very rich environment, and something to really explore further. The video was very impressive, and Mike's overview obviously indicates the depth of this platform. There were some specific questions for Mike and Endless specifically, and maybe you can both comment on these. But one that came in was, Mike, you mentioned that you were very local. You had global support, open source, and also extremely local. So how does the Endless Support Network work in the local communities?
So I think it depends on the region, right? And I mean, going local requires, you know, going local everywhere, you know, if we were actually, you know, support deploying everywhere. So in places where we have larger deployments and more activity, obviously we have built our network up in, you know, much larger. We have an ambassadors program that we're currently rolling out, which is, you know, becoming fairly large in Brazil and Mexico, a few places in Southeast Asia, again, where we have larger deployments. But when we think about our network of support, you know, there is an online component, a community of, you know, we are obviously catering to both the kind of offline rural user as well as the development community that actually helps us. You know, we have kind of this massive, you know, support infrastructure from the open source community that has actually enabled us to develop this kind of an entire operating system, which, you know, is a massive feat. So that's the that's kind of a big focus for us. So as you know, in terms of my responsibility in the Middle East and Africa, those are definitely some of our kind of newer areas. We have partnered with UNICEF to put 800 computers in a few other refugee camps in kind of different situations around the Middle East. And in Africa, we've, you know, put computers, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and a few countries kind of around, you know, each of those regions. So we definitely are kind of distributing all over the world, and the support infrastructure you're asking about is, you know, kind of based on traction, and we grow that as, you know, quickly as we grow our deployments.
Yeah, I can imagine that your online support and your online global community manifest themselves in locations around the world, and then from there you have either enthusiasts or supporters go out to the various rural communities. Do you see some of that taking place?
It's interesting, yeah. I think in most rural communities, there's definitely, you know, a subset of you know, families or friends or people involved in the communities that have some technical background, and there's always a path that leads to those people at some point, and they typically become our largest partners, especially in rural communities. So that's kind of the theme of our, like I mentioned, our ambassadors program, where, you know, we we get in touch with them, they start using it, they start recommending it, and over time, kind of become, really more of a part of our organization, indirectly, that they can kind of be the point of contact, going to represent Endless and some of these rural communities, because it is an interesting challenge trying to kind of provide the same level of support that we are all used to living in, the U.S. and Europe, where we can call a support number anytime and somebody's available to help us, with all the problems we have.
Exactly.
So
go ahead.
I was going to ask a question actually related to partnerships, Mike, and this is specific, and this question also is for Rebecca. So this is specific to content, and there was a question around partnering with Microsoft, but I would also say some of the other organizations that have made their learning resources available to the refugee community. So whether it's Microsoft Resources for Refugees with digital literacy, entrepreneurship, or it's HP Life or Coursera or Udemy. How do you go about actually sourcing some of the learning content and partnering also with the organizations that are making learning resources available to refugees?
Yeah, no, I don't know if Rebecca, you can maybe add on to this, but in terms of what you guys have done in the Makani centers, but Endless, we see ourselves as a more of a platform for content. So we definitely don't see ourselves as experts in delivering educational content and materials. So I mentioned the kind of customizations that we can do on larger deployments. Essentially, if you have specific educational content on a topic or a specific source, we can take that and deploy it on Endless and make it kind of available offline. Right now, we deploy Khan Academy content, which is kind of free and open source, on the basic version of Endless OS. So with companies like Microsoft, who've kind of developed their own learning content, there obviously are legal implications around shipping that, but we are, that is typically a part of larger deployments, is you might bring in a content partner, and then we kind of become the platform for them to deliver their content in offline areas, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of people that can be involved to kind of deliver the right solution, and that's kind of how we see ourselves fitting in.
So Mike, just a clarifying question. Is it about really the user of the Endless OS, so that would be IMC or obviously UNICEF, would make a decision around what learning content, learning resources, and learning partners they would like to have involved in the delivery of the program?
Exactly, and I think, International Medical Corps, I think, is a testament to what's already on at the Endless OS, right? All of the content that comes prepackaged. I don't think that we actually built any new applications for them, as there is a lot already on there, and they've been getting enormous value out of just that. So it's not a necessity to kind of source content in order to partner with us, but it is an option if that's part of your mission or goals.
So technically, Mike, are you able to, you mentioned that you had Wikipedia or maybe potentially a subset of Wikipedia. Can you take any web content and kind of grab it and put it on these offline computers and distribute them via DVD or via thumb drives or whatever?
The path to go from web content all the way to kind of a thumb drive that can be shared is a bit rocky, but it's 100% possible. Our engineering team does need to be involved still, although our roadmap, our future plans are to enable just that, right? To kind of enable a content sharing network that's kind of in the offline areas and we can kind of be the platform to enable that. But right now, any web application we can convert and put on Endless. And then, there is ways to kind of transfer content that we're working on. So, yes, I would definitely say.
There was a very related question to that, basically so that are the Endless apps shipped with the OS, or can you also download them where there is connectivity, and how would you then manage distributing them to non-connected PCs?
So the Endless OS can use any content that's available. We can turn it into applications. Typically, though, if a computer is going to a completely offline area, there obviously are there's no way to update the computers or add new applications other than through that kind of USB manual process. So typically, we would kind of design the what needs to go in there, if something needs to change before the computers actually get deployed. If they're for the Makani Centers, for example, the computers are sitting in a primarily offline environment. So it can be difficult to update them, but Rebecca can correct me if I'm wrong there. So it's about creating the best experience offline. Even if you can't update the computers, they still work wonderfully, in that environment. That's kind of what we're, it's the best possible scenario or case with any scenario.
Right.
You mentioned this, I think, a couple of times, but I think it's worth repeating. What languages do you cover?
I believe the number is at 15 right now. So English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Thai, Indonesian, Arabic. There's a handful others. We're coming out with Swahili, a few languages in India as well in the next 6 months. So it's always on our roadmap as we expand to new areas. Languages, it's a bit of an effort as we expand, but obviously important.
Yeah, and actually related to that question, Diane was just asking about the content too. So there's obviously the OS itself and navigation. Does that apply to the content too that's available via Endless OS?
I'm sorry, actually, could you repeat the question?
The question is about content. So you talked about Endless OS being available in 15 languages.
Yeah.
Does that apply to the content, including the apps and learning resources that are accessible via Endless OS? I'm assuming not.
No, that's actually a great point. So the 15 languages include all of the content. The OS itself is actually available in every language on Earth. So in terms of like using the computer and navigating and things like that, everything is translated and it's no problem. The issue is obviously it takes a lot of time and energy to translate the content that's available in kind of the offline scenario. So that's where we've only gotten to about 15 languages, but covers a lot of the world, at least, with those languages.
Yeah, and actually related to offline scenario, there was a question about analytics, if Endless Analytics are available offline on the computers themselves. That's
actually another major differentiator for Endless. Obviously, at some point, an internet connection is required to have the metrics sent, but the OS has been built to actually capture and store metrics offline for anywhere from 30 to 60 days, depending on the amount of use. And then we're talking, kilobytes, very, very small, amounts of data that the metrics are coded in. So it doesn't affect user experience at all, and it's stored on the computer for whenever there is an internet connection. Then the metrics can upload. We also have a very easy process. If the computers are never going to be offline, there's a very easy process to basically either bring kind of a Wi-Fi hotspot around to each of the computers, or kind of a USB process where you can kind of download the metrics and you can kind of bounce from computer to computer, downloading metrics. And there's a very quick and easy process to do that. So again, kind of working with the best that we can in each scenario.
Yeah.
So,
there's a little bit of a delay. Mike, just to confirm, Jeremy was just asking, so I can view the metrics offline if I'm on site with no internet?
Right now, the visualization of the metrics is actually something that's still part of our core offering and that we need to provide. So the process would actually be you gathering the metrics all in kind of one file. Again, we have very simple instructions to do that, and then you sending them to us and our kind of host and basically our infrastructure kind of ingests them and spits out kind of visualization data that we then share with you on kind of a monthly or quarterly basis. So it's typically not like one unit. We definitely have strict privacy settings around looking at one computer's activity. So we report metrics on kind of a larger scale, right? We have to have at least 100 computers so that we can, provide kind of this app is being used this many times on average, this percentage in this place. So there is kind of a balance there of privacy versus, adding value for your business and understanding what's happening with the computers.
Yeah, there was a specific question around privacy, and I think you addressed it here, but maybe you can embellish a little bit. How do you manage privacy and protection issues, considering you're dealing with children and the computers do have access to the internet at some point?
Thank you so much. I appreciate this question because it actually speaks to one other benefit around our customization services. So in when dealing with children, obviously there's definitely some certain danger to the internet, and we are actually we have the ability to shut off the browsers, and essentially because we are built like a smartphone, right, where everything happens in an application, right? So you have a Facebook application on your phone, and you connect to the internet through the Facebook application, and there's really no way to get access to dangerous materials just through Facebook. Well, it's the same way with Endless. We can actually shut off the browser itself, and even if you do have internet, the applications and everything that already exists in Endless still actually provides you opportunities to access the internet without actually having any access to a kind of browser or search engine, which is a big part of the safety for kids. But again, that's part of the customization features that are possible.
Great. Thanks,
right,
Mike. There was a question. Oh, Rebecca, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just point out that that's why we have our activities coordinator and our volunteers that are, so there's also the people issue, right? So we have supervision. Children don't access the computers without some level of supervision. So that's another way that we ensure that there's some oversight to what they're viewing and what they're doing.
Great, thank you for that additional context. Another question for Mike, and it's about just getting some more details about how the computers or how the hardware gets to the locations. So specifically, where do you ship your hardware from?
So we have distribution in Nairobi that distributes to various countries in Africa. We also have, that's kind of my region. Also, Abu Dhabi has inventory where we distribute to areas in the Middle East. And then obviously the US, South America, and Indonesia kind of have their own hubs as well. But we are expanding that, and there's obviously, once you kind of get above a certain amount, then there's complete flexibility around, we can ship directly to you from our manufacturer, but that's worth, that's for larger quantities.
Okay, and then actually related to Africa, do you partner with Sierra Leone?
We actually don't have any deployments or pilots happening in Sierra Leone at the moment, but we're very excited to, we'd love to talk. Yeah, we have, I think, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and I believe that's it right now, but we have multiple other countries that things are kind of getting started with. And so, yeah, definitely not outside of our range at all.
Mike, we definitely would like to get you to the ICT4D conference in Lusaka in Zambia in May. So let's make sure we follow up on that. There could be some interesting presentations.
Absolutely.
I think you could have a great presentation there. There was another question that came in. First of all, I did post a link to the webinar satisfaction poll. So if people that are listening in can click on that link and provide us some feedback, that would be fantastic. Also indicate if you want to be contacted by the speakers or anyone here at NetHope. The question that came in was, if your device was to be stolen, could it be jailbroken and resold?
This is, the iPhone in the U.S. has been, jailbroken before. I think this is, yes, there's definitely hackers in the world. I'm sure they could, tackle an endless computer. I'm not sure why they'd want to, but, this isn't, there is, security measures. You do have to log in. You create a profile the same as any other device. Currently we don't offer, locks or, security features as part of our offering, but we've had many different partners kind of include that in their deployment. I completely understand the security, especially in the regions that we're targeting.
Great, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Rebecca. So we will make sure to share all the content with all of the attendees, and you're welcome to actually share that with your networks. You have Rebecca and Mike's emails on this slide. Thank you again for joining us for this conversation about Makani Center, so UNICEF Development Initiative and IMC's implementations in Jordan specifically, and their partnership with Endless. Excellent questions on the call today, and do let us know through the poll your feedback on this specific webinar, and then also don't forget to let us know what topics and programs you'd like to see on these webinars in 2018. Again, thank you very much, Rebecca and Mike, and all of you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Leila.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Leila, for putting this series on for the Solutions Center. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thanks so much.